Over the last few months, we have heard that sportsmen and women throughout Colorado have questions about Colorado Parks and Wildlife's funding situation. This presentation is designed to provide some of that information. Since 2005, has your utility bills increased? Has the cost of healthcare increased? Does it cost you more to feed your family? At CPW, our costs have increased. Conserving Colorado's wildlife and managing wildlife recreation is costly. With our wildlife funding, CPW pays for scientifically monitoring big game herds to balance herd size with social and public desires, operating fish hatcheries to make sure that our lakes and rivers are stocked with fish, preserving important wildlife areas before they are developed, restoring wildlife populations to our state like moose, lynx, black-footed ferrets, and many more. And, like many things, this work gets more expensive every year. We know that your license fees have gone up over time. However, these increases have not kept pace with inflation. This chart shows the effects of never-ending march of inflation on how the revenue CPW receives today isn't going as far. First, the top line shows the effect of inflation, also known as the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. The CPI measures a variety of consumer goods to show how prices increase over time. Since 1964, prices have generally increased by a factor of about 8 times. As you can see, if we had increased license fees along with CPI over the years, an in-state elk license would now cost $88, not the $45 we actually charge today. In-state license fees have remained the same since 2005. Therefore, revenue from these licenses has stayed the same. Meanwhile, here are examples of just some of the costs we have that are going up even faster than the rate of inflation, which, since 2005, was 17%. To highlight just two of the costs on this page, the price for fish food has gone up 92%, and a John Deere tractor 81%. The sportsmen and women who hunt and fish in Colorado directly or indirectly provide the majority, 78%, of CPW's wildlife funding. By state and federal law, we keep our parks and wildlife funding sources completely separate. Wildlife funding does not pay for state parks, and state park entrance fees do not pay for wildlife. Also, Colorado Parks and Wildlife is considered an enterprise agency. This means that we receive no tax revenue from the State of Colorado General Fund. Here is how funding for Colorado Parks and Wildlife affects the wildlife that is important to you. Colorado Parks and Wildlife staff works hard to ensure that hunting opportunities continue to exist in our state. Hunting in Colorado is part of our Western heritage and has been critical to our state's story from the beginning. CPW biologists work hard to ensure that our game herds are healthy enough for you to hunt. Wildlife populations can change dramatically from year to year, so this takes constant monitoring. Just one example of how we monitor herds is that we use helicopters as an important data collection tool. From this bird's eye view, we can judge the productivity of a population, estimate its size, and evaluate the percentage of adult males and females. Using this scientifically collected data, CPW manages the number of hunting licenses available to the public while still protecting our herds for the future. In the period of time since we last raised our in-state license fees, the cost of helicopter time has more than doubled. Without increased funding, CPW staff will be forced to do fewer surveys. Without this survey information, we will manage more conservatively, and this means a decrease in the number of licenses available. From the beginning of the Colorado Fish Commission in 1877, this agency has been making sure that fish reside in the lakes and streams of Colorado. CPW provides over 90 million fish into Colorado's waters for fishing. Unfortunately, the cost of raising fish are continually increasing. Colorado Parks and Wildlife runs 19 fish hatcheries. Since our last license fee increase in 2005, the increase in utility costs to run these hatcheries, the cost of fish food, as I mentioned earlier, and the cost of fuel to move fish around the state has skyrocketed. CPW buys over 2 million pounds of fish food every year. To account for the increases, hatcheries have already been forced to raise fewer fish. Without an increase in revenue, the number of fish available in Colorado's streams and rivers will continue to decline. CPW invests in habitat across the state, including 350 state wildlife areas. With the passage of habitat stamp legislation, hunters and anglers have provided for maintaining habitat and access. Protecting habitat on a shrinking income means making tough choices about how best to conserve wildlife and habitat. For example, we may have to make a choice to cut the aquatic invasive species program. The presence of aquatic invasive species negatively impacts the health of our lakes and streams and opportunities for boating recreation, which could mean we have to close reservoirs. So, let's talk about our options. One question we hear sometimes is, why doesn't CPW just recruit more hunters? Well, CPW's decisions about wildlife populations is based on science and input from sportsmen. These decisions have never been based on raising revenue, and if they were, CPW feels that could compromise the health of wildlife populations as well as put more hunters into an area, causing overcrowding. Non-resident hunters pay about 13 times more than a resident does for the opportunity to hunt elk in Colorado. Non-resident elk hunters alone provide 51% of the revenue that CPW brings in from license fees. Non-resident license fees also increase with inflation every year, meaning that those fee prices rise as the cost of living increases, bringing in higher revenue. CPW has already cut more than $40 million in 50 positions out of wildlife budgets. We have already raised prices within our scope by increasing the antlerless elk prices for non-residents, charging for preference points, and changing refund policies. CPW has already deferred maintenance on many of our facilities. These decisions have made the funding situation worse. Repairing dams and fish hatcheries is expensive and only gets more costly as we put off vital repairs. Despite efforts to be leaner, the reality is that managing wildlife in Colorado is getting more expensive, even if you discounted the price of fish food. Colorado's population is growing rapidly, urban wildlife conflicts are becoming more frequent, and habitat is facing even more pressure. In the future, more will be asked of CPW as an agency. We simply cannot continue on our current path without additional resources. In fact, by 2023, Colorado Parks and Wildlife will need about $15 to $20 million more from resident licenses just to maintain current operations and services for conserving and managing wildlife in Colorado. If CPW is going to enhance services that sportsmen tell us are important, such as increasing access for hunting and fishing, we will need about $31 to $36 million more. To continue the important work of conserving wildlife for you, for hunters, for anglers, and for other wildlife enthusiasts, it is time to make some important decisions, which is why we are asking for your input. Coloradans have not seen an increase in resident license fees since 2005. No one wants to increase resident fees, but at this point in time, it has to be discussed. We understand that would significantly affect all of you, and you have a choice. We want to know what your top priorities are, how much you are willing to pay, and what comes off the project list if sufficient funding is not available. Here's another graph that will help you see the options we have. First, the vertical dotted line represents where we are at today. Next, the blue line is where the consumer price index, or inflation, is projected to go in the next few years. The yellow line is where we're at and where we will continue to be without an increase. This line is not good for wildlife and would require more cuts. Our first option that will certainly help is to increase fees modestly and then tie the fees to inflation. This is represented by the solid green line. This will allow us to continue operations as they are now, but not address the backlog of deferred maintenance or restore any previously made cuts. Another option is represented by the dashed green line, which is to increase license fees to match where they should be at on the consumer price index. A larger increase would allow us to pay for things we aren't paying for now, including dams and hatcheries, additional access, and maintenance of state wildlife areas. The green options help Colorado Parks and Wildlife manage your wildlife and continue to provide residents the opportunity to hunt, fish, and enjoy wildlife. The difference between the two lines is dependent on what you want to see from CPW. The Colorado General Assembly has the authority to set resident license prices. In 2017, if the legislature does not approve an increase in the price of in-state licenses, CPW will be forced to continue cutting programs. We have public comment forms available on our webpage, shown below, to ask you what you think. Please take a few minutes and let us know your thoughts about the future of funding wildlife conservation and management in Colorado. Although potentially compelling, we know that none of these facts make it any easier for sportsmen and women to support increasing fees to hunt and fish. Colorado's economy is growing, but that doesn't mean we don't have to work hard to raise our families and earn a living wage. We also know this presentation may raise more questions than it can answer. We have developed some resources which are linked on our financial sustainability page that offer more detail. Thank you for your time and attention.